My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Dick Aften. It's September 6th, 2024. We're at Dick's home in Salem. Dick, thank you so much for joining us today. First question, why wine?
Well, we have to start way back college. When I met a fellow, the coach got me a summer job on campus moving furniture, University of Minnesota in 1966. We shared some interests. He was very interested in classical music, primarily opera. And so he had an incredible hi-fi set up at his house, but he had a small house. He lived with his parents. They were Czechoslovakian, but Joe Jovanovic loved music, and he blasted beautiful music through the house. And he opened wine. I was not a drinker. I was a runner and did not drink beer in high school. Didn't drink wine in high school. I was kind of weird. But my body and running and all that sort of stuff. So it was pretty awful wine looking back. It was Myers Tawny Port, Catawba grapes, that sort of thing. But, it was so damn cool to sit there with a glass of wine and enjoy great arias, music reverberating off the crystal chandeliers in the little room. I guess the romanticism of that led me to learn more about wine. Started reading books about wine history, all the French stuff, Schoonmaker's Encyclopedia, all those books that you could get, Wines of the World, that sort of thing. That really fascinated me. And finally, I think one Thanksgiving I convinced my father to go down to a great liquor store in Minneapolis called Haskell's. There, I just was blown away by these German labels. I had already studied about German wines in the valley, the Rhine and the Mosel valleys, and how idyllic they were. So I picked out a bottle, from my knowledge of the books, and Dad bought a bottle of German Riesling. I think it was from the Mosel, and we had it for Thanksgiving, and it was great. Okay, and that was kind of my wine experience. Then I graduated from college and got drafted immediately. So that was a big change in my life, and I was not happy. I didn't want to be a soldier. One of my teammates, a little older than me, we were runners, cross-country track, and one of those, Mike Elwell, was blown to pieces. I went to his funeral, and it was so depressing. This guy was such a pacifist. He was the last guy you would think would be a soldier. And that affected me. I didn't protest in Minnesota. There were sit-downs, but I had a athletic scholarship, so I couldn't miss practice. I could cut classes all I wanted, and I did, but I didn't miss any practice. But it did affect me, and darn it, a lot of us guys went off and came back either wounded. Other teammates came back wounded, disabled. So anyway, I got drafted, and they kicked me out. I got the uniform, Port Campbell, Kentucky, 101st Airborne, paratrooper. I was interested in maybe setting some kind of fast time on the practice track wearing combat boots. That interested me, but nothing else. high blood pressure, heart murmur, 3 days of testing, my measurements were going down, the blood pressure measurements were going down. I became more panicked, and eventually I failed. They took their good time in processing me out. I spent a month there at the fort, and finally they kicked me out. I came home and decided to marry my girlfriend. You know, life had changed a lot. I had to move back to my parents. I had no place to go. Beth at that time was living in Miami, me in Minneapolis. We met at the University of Minnesota, but her dad moved her to Miami. So we were pen pals for a long time. And but now we got to do something. I went back to graduate school for that winter term, and then
What year?
this would have been 68. This would have been 1968, and then we got married in June 18th, 1969, and coming back, we spent our honeymoon night over on Miami Beach. Great place. But we came home. Her father gave us for a dowry a '66 Mustang. Oh man, I had a jalopy back home that, you know, salt streets in Minnesota. You could see the road from the driver's seat. So now I got a '66 Mustang. This is '69, and we hooked it up with the cans that the kids had put behind and rattling, and and drove our way up to Minneapolis. Picked up all my school books. I had arranged to do graduate work at the University of Oregon. They crazily accepted me. And Beth got a job as a nurse at Sacred Heart Hospital. She graduated from Miami as an RN with very high grades. She was a smart gal. And in Minnesota then, we got a U-Haul trailer. We called it our covered wagon, and we head over the Oregon Trail. I had never been west of Minnesota, and so the Bighorn Mountains and snow, oh my gosh, was that exciting. And then into Yellowstone, and then down to the Tetons. And I remember asking a ranger, he had been asked this a million times, I said, "Where's all the wildlife?" And he said, "Oh, it's all down at Jackson Hole." But we had a great time. We were camping. Okay, we slept in a tent. I had bought a tent. I had gone through scouting, learned how to put up a campsite, and so we camped all the way. And I knew how to cook, and we ate a lot of Dinny Moore stew and canned tomatoes. Not tomatoes, potatoes. But heck, young kids, we had a blast. We just had a blast discovering the West. Finally entered Oregon. And I was a little shocked. The sagebrush kept going and going and going. There was the Ochakos and things like that. But wow, there's a lot of sagebrush. What is this idyllic place we've heard about? And finally we hit the Cascades, stopped for lunch in Sisters, and then went into the mountains. And now we were feeling good until we got to Springfield. Springfield, Oregon, we saw the pulp mills belching out aromas and that, and then we had to start living in Eugene. We had to find an apartment. We had to get Beth her job. It was all exciting. We were young, and this sort of thing. And then, yeah, we were backpacking and hiking and doing all that stuff, running down to the Redwoods. First trip to Napa Valley, came in there, and oh man, when I saw my first, they were probably belonging to Fetzer vineyards. When I saw my first vineyards, I don't know, it really stuck to me. And then Napa Valley and Hans Cornell, met him and actually stumbled into Joe Heights. He came out in his rubber boots, and didn't see Robert Mondavi, but sure enjoyed the new facility. They're beautiful, and that was great. Okay, get back to Oregon, going to school, about a year and a half of graduate school, and then
What subject?
philosophy, yeah. And one of the reasons we picked Eugene was the running. The Oregon, running capital of the United States, beautiful place. Anyway, and we watched all of Steve Prefontaine's home meets. It was great. But going to school, and then miraculously somehow my wife got pregnant. And she, being much more practical than I am, said, "You need a job." I am not going to be working during, I'm going to raise this child. She did go back to work part-time, but I had to find a job. Well, I walked down the street, about 1,000 yards, there was a brand new wine shop. Knocked on the door, never thinking they would hire me, but there was a wine shop. I thought I could talk wine, and lo and behold, they were expanding their deli. And they needed somebody to help make sandwiches. But that somebody had to know something about wine, so the manager sat me down and asked me basically some history, and then he asked me this question: what's the difference between Burgundy and Bordeaux? I knew, but I had to think, make sure I got the right one. When the Pinot Noir, Cabernet Merlot, and I had to think, but I got it right, hired. Started working that week. And this is a walk from my house, so again, fortuitous, just that sort of thing.
What was the shop called?
Grape and Grain, 29th and Willamette, Grape and Grain, brand new store. Got in there. We had a lunch rush always, but then it was in the early mornings before lunch, and the afternoons and evenings. All I did was walk around and tell stories about wine and sell wine and learn more from my customers. It was great. The shop was brand new, dark racks, held thousands of bottles, sold mostly imports. And there I met Richard Summers. Richard came up from Roseburg. There were people already running down to his winery to buy wine at that time. Some of them were buying it in barrels. And we started selling his wines, and they became some of the biggest selling single items in the store, particularly this little guy. I don't know if you...
Oh my gosh, yes.
Mellow Red. This was a blended wine, had Cabernet, would have had some Riesling, also had some Gewürztraminer, and I think the blend kind of changed over the years. But I could sell this for $1.59. And let's call them hippies, but there was more than that. There were folks coming in and then picking it up by the case. I had no idea. I mean, most of the time I want to be talking about these German wines that I loved, and a few French wines that I knew, and then the Mondavis and the Krugs and the Heitzes and on and on. But Richard Summers was everybody refers to him as a pretty interesting guy. He wanted to be a loner. He was happy being a loner, but he was also adorable. Really, I learned from Richard, and he would deliver his lines personally, of course. That was just him. And then finally, Bill Nelson went to work for him. And Bill became my salesman. They would alternate depending on who had to do what in Eugene. And got to know Bill Nelson quite well. Bill, as you know and other people know, is a real force in the Oregon wine industry. Everything that he's done politically and lobbying and really promoting. That was a good connection. We had David Adelstein. No, I'm wrong about that. It was David Lepp and Dick Aften come to our store to sell wine, and we'd buy a case of this, a mixed case usually to start with, and put them on the shelves and promote them. And then when we started doing some volume of Oregon wine, Eugene was a good place, I think, to start selling Oregon wines. The professors coming in for great cheeses, and they started buying Oregon wines, and these guys from the wine country weren't coming soon enough, so I had to get in the car with Beth, and we'd go up there, and Dickie Rat's garage. I couldn't believe it after being in California. I couldn't believe that this was a winery. Okay. Looking around, and no, there's the stainless steel vats in the garage, and a couple of wooden barrels, but mostly stainless steel, and it was kind of haphazard. But the wine, loaded up the truck with wine, and then went on to David Lett, and again, strange kind of winery, old turkey production places, but oh man, what a character! Everybody knows David Lett, and that was great to get to know him and see what he was doing, and already Pinot Noir, that he really was being that into me. So we'd go back, we'd sell the wine, they'd come and deliver it. I got to know these guys pretty well. Grape and Grain, we had an incredible staff while I was working there. Kids from the college that were going to school. We had one guy that was doing postdoctoral work in molecular biology. A genius! Photographic memory, knew everything about wine. I hired him for the Christmas rush. And I learned so much more about wine than I knew, and he was a teacher. He was a slow-talking, deliberate, just great guy. Another employee, part-time employee, he was from the business school, but he went on to become national sales manager at Behringer Wines. Amazing. Another guy, Kent, he worked for us, again, part-time, mostly in the deli, and he turned out to be the wine buyer for Cost Plus. So we were pretty hot. We were guys that were loving wine. We'd get together, we'd drink wine, we'd have dinners. It was pretty hot. We could sell too, and that's what we did, and educated people. We taught classes, went to hotels, got a free room, got their glassware. If we taught some of their servers about wine, we would charge the professors and the physicians to come in to learn about different wines. So we were in a way promoting, and there was always an Oregon wine in there there were a lot of imports and domestics because you wanted to compare. To teach, you wanted those comparisons. So all that was going on. I did a newsletter, monthly newsletter. Typed the darn thing out on an Underwood typewriter, and then it got printed and mailed out at a mailing list. And there we, New Oregon Wines got promoted in that. Told a little story, what the winemakers would tell me. And then we also had selling to us John Henney from Henney Imports. And he didn't come down all the time. Mike Rutherford was Henny Hinsdale's first employee. Howard and Karen had bought into John Henney's business, and these guys were really interesting and fun to talk about. They wanted to talk about these California wines that they had discovered and found, the Schramsberg, the Heights, the Ridges, and they got on towards shelves, but mostly it was Drouhin Burgundies. Mostly I bought Drouhin Burgundies. John Henney would come down here and he would just fill me with great stories. Oh, that guy, consummate salesman. You just loved John and you wanted to hear his stories. He always had a little joke. Slightly off color sometimes, but it was such a people man, a people person. Well, eventually they hired me. I was so pleased at Grape and Grain. I never thought about going back to school. I had left. At the end of a spring term in graduate school, and because we were going to have a child, went to work and never thought about, didn't give it a second thought and still haven't. It was fun. Oh, dang, this was fun. People were paying me. Amazing. Then Henny Hinsdale, wow, we had the small little, it was a elongated garage basically, temperature control, cement floor, and just the stacks of Latour, stacks of Mouton Rothschild, stacks of Lafitte, stacks of Chassagne Montrachet, Delaguiche, Drouhins, mostly Drouhin. We had Jadot, Louis Jadot, but mostly Drouhin products. And oh my God, I thought I had died and gone to heaven. And then little sections of California wine. They didn't sell. Henny Hinsdale, because it was such a premium selection, Portland wasn't a big enough market to make it. That's forced John, Howard, and Karen to go all the way down to like the Cheshire Cat wine shop in Ashland, Chateau Lynn in Ashland, great restaurant, over to Sun River in Bend, over to Salishan, Phil DeVito in Salishan, and then to make those things, while you're over there, you got more accounts. And that was kind of my job. So I was a second employee. The first was Mike Rutherford.
What year were you hired?
Yeah, I was 75, yeah. Moved to Salem, and Mike Rutherford was the second employee. Excuse me, I'm the second employee. Mike was the first. From Reedsford, knew Howard. Howard was somebody that, let's say loyalty was important, and people he knew. I don't know. They hired me because I was selling a lot of their wine, and they maybe knew more about wine than Mike and Howard would drink wines, and later we'll talk about Steve Carey. But once I got there, I realized that there wasn't any Oregon wines. And I'm looking back at my history, and Oregon wines were a common thing. It was obvious. And so I arranged a tasting at our rented house in Salem while we were looking for a home, and 3 Rieslings. And there was Freemark Abbey, Heights Riesling, and Hillcrest Riesling. Blind tasting. And Howard has a great palate. Howard has a really good palate, and I did his interview. He was interested in German wines, and so he knew his German wines. And we didn't have a German wine in there, but Hillcrest came out on top, and they were surprised. Within a couple of weeks, I had set up an appointment for him to go visit Richard Summers at the winery and sign some kind of deal. Nothing was signed, it's just a handshake. But I'm a little apprehensive. Howard, wealthy guy, and I think there were Eastern prep schools in his background. And Richard Summers sometimes would be a little different. Okay, I had set up the appointment. We got there on time and knocked on the door. No one showed up. Walked around the house, knocked on the back door. No one showed up. Oh gosh. No one's here. I told Richard we were coming, all this. And finally, front door again, and the cracks open and Richard's peering through. And I tell him, Richard, we're here. And, oh, okay, come on in. Don't know where he was or what he was doing. In a small house, walked in, and he was making lunch. Looked like some spaghetti type thing. Kitchen wasn't in really great shape. But he offered Howard some spaghetti, and I'm thinking, no, this isn't. Howard sat down there graciously, and he loved it. It just, oh, wow, okay, this is great. Howard's just sitting there eating this concoction of which I just barely tasted. Then we went toward the winery, and long story short, they brought Hillcrest back, and we started selling an Oregon wine. And it wasn't long after that David Lett came. I think part of the reason these people went in to look for some distribution was because they were growing, of course, inventories, but they had children. Their wives, who had helped them so much do everything, and some deliveries, I think put their foots down. Erath, Lett, Adelsheim later. And I think they realized, even though they had to give away some of their profits to us, we took about 25% of what they wanted to sell their wines for. And then, but they got bigger, and pretty soon we found them, and it was kind of fortuitous that we had taken Hillcrest on, and we had gotten to be known as the distributor of Oregon wines, and we could take these things all over the state, which we did. Let's see. Then the second employee came along, another Reedsport fellow called Stephen Carey, who was a huge force in that influenced the creation of the better Pinot Noirs, the Steamboat Conference that he initiated. This guy, amazing, and he was, a friend of Howard's. They had tasted wines in Reedsport, had a love for cars. Howard is a real Mercedes freak, and Steve Carey loved cars. I think he had a little Cobra at one time, and he had a Datsun Z at the time that we drove around to basketball games. It's something I don't think you know about, that you may not know about Steve, was that Steve was a swimmer. And he would have been a state champion if it wasn't for a guy called Mark Spitz here out of Lake Oswego. But Steve went to the University of Indiana, which had an incredible swimming team and program back in those days. At the same time, I was competing also in the Big Ten, you know, on the ground. He was swimming, I'm running. And it's interesting, the first 3 employees were Big Ten athletes in a wine company, maybe a beer company. But so anyway, Steve was a great employee, he was sales. Eventually, Steve went into the purchasing aspect. And that, of course, telephone conversations with all our Oregon wineries and this sort of thing. He learned so much from them, and then later saw that opportunity to go into carry Oregon wines and distribute Oregon wine through much of the country. What a story. I'm sorry the guy's passed away, and sorry I didn't get to know him better. We were so busy at the time. We just got to do this and that. The other thing you didn't know about Steve is he's an author.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, he wrote this book, and he wrote the text for this book. It's mostly photographs of the Oregon dunes and lots of poetry. But Steve wrote the text and the introduction. And so, yeah, I can't say enough about Steve. So I had guys like Steve Carey, Karen Hinsdale, John Henney. I mean, that guy taught me how to sell, how to tell a story. And you can't teach anybody really how to sell, but he was definitely my mentor. And then Karen, just so positive and making Beth and I feel so at home. Christmas presents, a 6-pack of first growth champagnes, including there was a Montrachet in there, Delaguiche. Oh man, this was heaven. This was great. In the greenhouse, John Henney's greenhouse, he was a rhododendron grower, first an onion farmer, then rhododendron grower, president of Rhododendron Society, met Baron Philippe the Rothschild, who had an interest in rhododendrons, probably met Druin over there or something, and brought back and got interested in wine, and pretty soon doing dock sales, no license, just he'd get wines from San Francisco. Jimmy Blumen, a national wine, had the Druins and stuff, and then he was selling just to friends, just I don't know, like a bootlegger, I guess. And finally, he was getting into a position where he said, you know, maybe I should get a license, get a permit to do this. And I think he was requested, I think by Blumen, you want to really sell some of this stuff. Why don't you become our Oregon distributor? And that led to trading Henney Imports. And then Howard and Karen, I don't remember exactly the year that they got to become partners. They went to one of John Henney's tasting and they got in love, and they became partners. So these individuals were just, I was just thrilled to be a part of that association. It was fun. It was fun. At John Henney's place, he had this beautiful sort of mansion. He made a lot of money. The guy could sell onions. He got top price for his onions. And then he sold rhododendrons. And his wife had favorite rhododendrons that he had planted in the front yard that had been growing up. Howard Hinsdale's father loved rhododendrons and had this island off of Reedsport where Howard grew up. And you can go there on Mother's Day now, I think, and they'll open it up to these beautiful rhododendron gardens. Again, just amazing. So John, when I got to work there, 7 in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, the first thing he did was walked into the greenhouse, not the warehouse where the wine was, but the greenhouse where they were doing cuttings and clonings of rhododendrons. And there they had a fire going and a potbelly stove. John was in his coveralls, his boot, and his German associate, Schmidt Wittekamp, who did most of the work in the nursery, was sitting there. And the humidity and the smell of the earth coming in from the greenhouse, the warmth coming out of there. We sat around and we listened to John Henney, who had been to a Blazer game that night before, talking all about, they talked basketball. John had season tickets to the Blazer games, of which he gave us some when there was ice on the roads, and he didn't want to drive his Cadillac up to Portland. Oh man, you talk about romance, idyllic, big tall fir trees. And then around 9 o'clock we'd saunter into the warehouse and we'd start putting together orders that we had to deliver that day. I answered a few phone calls because we did most of our order taking through the phone, set things up, people called us. We weren't really knocking on doors. You knocked on doors, got an account, and then you set it up for them to call you. That's not how it's done today. Rarely, I don't think. But that's the way it was. And this was, oh man, it was wonderful. Yeah, we worked very hard, because then we'd put up boxes and that and take a bunch of cases and throw them in. Howard had 2 vans, a Chevy van and a long Dodge van that really bounced and had good springs, and once you put in 50 cases of wine, it would settle down a little bit. Karen, I was not a good driver and had a few accidents, and there's some great stories. We'll skip over that. So yeah, the point was that we worked really hard, drive up to Portland. We'd drive down to Ashland, once a month in the beginning. We'd drive over to Sun River in these trucks every other Friday. Black Butte Ranch, Tumalo Emporium, Corey's House of Wine, my goodness, Wall Street and Bend. This guy, Treasure House of Wine and Cigars. This guy could sell wine. This guy sold Forest Growth Bordeaux's every week. Just unbelievable. They didn't cost $200-300 a bottle then. Wholesale was about $25 a bottle for a First Growth Bordeaux back then. How come I have some? But, yeah, kids went without shoes, but I got my Bordeaux. Okay, so anyway, Corey's Treasure House of Wine and Bend, amazing. So we could fill up a truck, but it was a long way back then to Salem. So those were long nights. And then when we didn't go to Bend, we went to the coast. And we would develop accounts all along. And in Newport, you had J.C. Market, who had a lot of wines and liked Oregon wines for the tourist industry. Winchester Inn, all the way down in Florence, for heaven's sakes. That made a long trip. But we did it. We did it. Phil DeVito, of course, would call his orders in sometimes after he finished waiting on customers at 11 o'clock at night on Thursday. And delivery was due on Friday. But we had special arrangement with Phil where we stored a lot of the wines that was on his list in a special area. So I could run in there early in the morning, put together Salashan's order, My truck had already been loaded with everything else, but we'd put together Salishan's order, which was the biggest order of the load, and then get it delivered. So yeah, we put on a lot of miles. We put on a lot of miles, and I loved it all. It was not work. It was, it kept busy. Okay. We moved to this place in 70, we bought this place in 78, grass seed field. There's nothing out here. Bought 4 acres. We thought, well, the plan the realtor sold us on was, you buy these 4 acres and then you subdivide them and then you can get your house in the woods, which was something we preferred rather than living in the middle of a grass seed field. But we built a house on here and started laying down some roots. I went crazy and planted 60 vines. Got a Troy-built horse rototiller and went out there and tilled the ground, put in 60 vines, and later learned that I had a horrible site because of the hill where Coria Winery is now located. The frost would come down and I would have bud break and the first leaf would come out, and then they were brown and frozen the next one morning. And so I never got a really ripe harvest. Made wine, horrible wine. Read all the books on winemaking. I think I did everything. There wasn't spoilage. Oh, I'm sure there was, but there wasn't much spoilage. It was just wine from unripe grapes. So we tore the vineyard out after about 4 years and planted all these hundreds and hundreds of trees. Many of them are 80. They've been here 46 years. So now we live in the forest. We made our forest. And let's see, the company was growing. Howard had sort of taken the 3 of us and put us in different realms of operation. I went into sales. I was more into sales. Stephen Carey was more into the purchasing part of it, and Mike Rutherford more into making sure the schedules and the vehicles and this sort of thing. They had also, Howard and Karen had bought a place in Salem, off of Salem Industrial Drive. That's on the way to the UPS here in Salem. And there they had a larger warehouse, which is what we needed because now we were getting containers of wine. We were doing Behringer truckloads of Behringer wines. They had, wines in gallon jugs, and Behringer White Zinfandel, Fetzer Sundial Chardonnay, Glen Ellen. We had some dynamo brands, and because, again, we were a statewide distributor, and they could just deal with Howard and Karen instead of beer distributors throughout every place else in the state, except Portland. They could have premium distributors in Portland, but if they wanted an outlet in Bend or in Ashland or Medford, which was really growing while we were working, we were ideal. Brilliant move by John, Howard, and Karen to do this. Again, it was all necessary to survive, but we're growing a big warehouse, and we're having to learn how to move things around in pallets. But the Oregon wine was always sort of special to us because we could take our sales staff quickly on a Friday and visit the wineries and learn the stories. We had sales meetings twice a month on Fridays. the Oregon winemakers would come to us. David Lett would come and say, Pinot Noir, Pinot Noir. We just that's what you got to concentrate on. You got on my Pinot Noir and all. Yeah, the Dick Aften, the Ponzis, Myron Redford, all were. Myron was real close and saw him often, and the sales staff enjoyed having that individual personal touch, the real person. Richard Summers, oh, here's something, I'm going crazy. David Lett, you heard so much about David Lett's Oregon Spring Wine, the first Pinot Noir in the Willamette Valley. But here's a bottle of the 1970 Hillcrest. Richard brought this up to the staff. Our staff that day was probably already around 10, 12 salesmen who had pretty educated palates. And when he opened this bottle of wine and passed it around the room, people were pretty amazed. This guy, wow, look at the ullage. Oh, you can't see that. The ullage is down to about here on the spring wine. The Pinot Noir is up here from Hillcrest. It's probably a pretty darn good wine still. It was huge. It was dark. It was big. And Richard said, 1970, hot year. And then he went, Pinot Noir, Pinot Noir, with the emphasis on the noir, the black Pinot. Oh, okay. Yeah, this is, compared to David Lett's, who's always a little more Burgundian and on the lighter side. But that 1970 Hillcrest Pinot, if I had one thing to impress, is that Richard Summers deserves much more credit than he gets. He was the pioneer. All these guys came through his operation and were inspired by some of his wine. Richard, on the other hand, made some not so great. There was some inconsistency. Thank heavens for Bill Nelson. But I remember one time on the way to California with a case of Hillcrest Riesling. And strangely enough, on I-5, we weren't stopping at the winery. I had the wine, and we were going down, bringing the wine to California, maybe to trade for some winemakers, other stuff, this sort of thing. All of a sudden, pop! In the back of our car, and then again, what the heck? 2 bottles of Hillcrest Riesling had second fermented so much that the heat on I-5 near Roseburg had made them blow the corks. Fortunately, it was only those 2, but yeah, the rest had a little effervescence in them. Not a bad thing, but I don't think that was intended. So anyway, let's get back to now. We get back to David Lett's Pinot Gris. Ah, what a deal that was. He promoted Pinot Gris, and he sold us a bunch, and we went out and sold it to customers. And it was a pretty good thing until I think it was about the 2nd vintage, maybe the 3rd vintage, where it threw a bunch of tartrate crystals. You maybe have heard about this episode, but the whole batch, tartrate, we started getting complaints from our restaurants. They were, my customer, you only got them in the last glass. So when you finish the bottle, the tartrates were in that last glass typically. And so we had a problem. We got David in, and he said, and then he explained to us that it was all healthy. There wasn't going to be any problem. This is a natural process. There was a step that had been neglected or not thought about. But we had a hard time. But it was good too, because there was more education. We had to go to these restaurateurs and we had to explain that. One of our staff, I believe it was Ursula Haskins, who came up with the term wine diamonds. And once we had that term, wine diamonds, Yeah, we were able to turn the whole thing around because David was not too keen on taking back 100 cases of Pinot Gris or the rest of the vintage. Then the other producers started coming online, Adelsheim, Ponzi, and they were in our stable, and we had most of this Pinot Gris, and pretty soon we had a problem. It was so popular. It was so popular that we ran out of it in about, first it lasted 6 months, and then it started only lasting 3 months. And people were getting mad. They had printed lists. They had on their lists, they had a printed list. There were computers coming out by then, but a list still wasn't easy to change. And they were pretty upset with us. I got this on the list. I put the Ponzi on, and maybe I can take the Adelsheim. And I said, no, we're out. And that went on for a couple of years. We couldn't get enough Pinot Gris. And it was the best thing in the world. Because everybody wanted what they couldn't get. It created problems, and now I've gone more into management, less into sales. I'm still taking trips to Bend and the coast occasionally, but now I'm into management. I'm getting these complaints, and so I worked out a system of allocation, and this was tough because we didn't have computers. We didn't know exactly how each salesmen were selling, but my salesmen were all bugging me for more Pinot Gris for their market, whether it was Bend or whether it was Eugene. We need Pinot, and oh man, what am I going to do? So right or wrong, my solution was to sort of carve it up based on salesmen's volume. If Eugene was selling so much dollars, then and Portland so much, and Bend so much, they got that percentage of Pinot Gris. 10 cases, maybe, of Ponzi, and maybe 8 cases and 20 cases of Irie. But it was a problem, but in a way, it led to some really interesting sales because everybody then wanted it. And so we had some other wines, and we actually started allocating them. Things like Leonetti and stuff. There was some small producers that everybody wanted. So this allocation system, but I got the calls. Oh, Karen got them too, and Howard got them too, but I was, the customer, the good customer who would ask the salesman, let me talk to your manager. So, but all along we talked so much about Pinot Gris came to be such a thing, and the wine by the glass was just starting. That was something we, of course, promoted heavily, trying to get all the restaurants, the big restaurants, the guys that knew their business well were doing wine by the glass, but the little guys hadn't started yet, and Karen worked out formulas, and we would show them how much profit they could make in wine by the glass. They were afraid that they'd open a bottle and they'd close on Monday, but on Tuesday, and they'd still have half of it left by Thursday, and they didn't want to throw it out. But we pushed that idea and showed them the profitability of selling wine by the glass. It's obvious for the guys that were in the business and started that, but that became such a big thing. And what a great way to promote New Oregon wines. What a good way to allocate some of that short supply things, where this restaurant got this one and that restaurant got this one. And so that was something you had to do in distribution, was to allocate these popular wines. And after the Gomio tastings and the Pinot Noirs, Oregon wines, but we had a tiger by the tail. We hadn't seen it coming, of course. It just sort of all happened, but I wasn't there for Sideways. I had retired already. I've been retired for 26 years now. I retired in '98. So, gosh, thank you for doing this, because it's really, obviously it's awoken a lot of memories and excitement. I'm kind of shaking.
This is great. I'm so glad. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to back up to you talking about John Henney teaching you how to sell wine. How do you sell wine? What did you find were the key points of selling wine?
John's first instructions to me were, Dick, you have to be a people person. You have to be a people person first of all. I was not, I think before I got into wine and in retail, I was more like Richard Summers. I wasn't out there that much, or didn't have many. I had friends, but I wasn't a socialite, and I was not a Karen Hinsdale, okay, or a John Henney. But you'd listen to that, and we were doing dock sales, and I watched John. With people like Neil Goldschmidt, good customers coming down from Portland to experience the display of these great wines, and then to salivate over these things. And John would pick out bottles with them and put them in cases, and but he always basically put his arm around them, told them stories, and then told stories about the wine and what he had learned from Robert Drouhin. Just watching him, you knew how to broach people, because to get into a new account, you kind of had to make yourself a friend. They didn't. Okay, sometimes the wines we sold were desirable enough that got us into the door in many cases. So the Oregon wine industry helped us with the really good retailers and the really good restaurants. But to get into the smaller little restaurants, like say a restaurant on the coast that had been doing their wine lists was done always by the beer companies, and there was a local association, and we were we're from Salem, but it's like, these guys from Portland. We're happy with what we're doing. To do that took some hard work, and you didn't get in right away, but you had to continue seeing these people and showing them that you're a human being and that you knew things that maybe they didn't know. You could tell them a little bit about what was happening. Did they have wine by the glass? Do you have wine by the glass on your wine list? And here's how to make some extra money. And then explaining more about Oregon wines. Not too many local beer companies had many of the Oregon wines. I think Oak Knoll was pretty widely distributed. Mm-hmm. Honeywood, of course, but Willamette Valley, that was Willamette Valley Vineyards. That was self-distributed, and they were getting around, but yeah. So you had to become friends with these people. You had to have something that they related to you about. I would sometimes go into the coast. I would take my kids when they didn't have school. I would take them, and we'd make deliveries, and then the kid would love to ride the hand truck back to the truck. We go down to the next place, and sometimes with the kids, and they were like taking dogs with you. So you learn that wasn't a typical sales maneuver, but it was, you had to relate to these people in some way or another. And I guess I got good at that because I got brought in a lot of accounts. And so did Mike Rutherford, so did Steve Carey, so did all of our salesmen. And Karen Hinsdale was incredibly important. Her passion, her drive, her ability to to work with accounts. She was an inspiration as well. She and I sort of drove the sales force. Howard was more into finance, keeping us liquid, and there's huge payments when you get a container of wine from Europe, semi-trucks full of wine from California, and when the warehouse full of wine, that's a huge, millions of dollars just sitting out there in the warehouse. So he was pulling out his ears trying to make all that work. We were growing. I mean, we had to buy forklifts. We had to buy forklifts. We had to put in a bottle room and build all these kinds of things that just we needed to put together orders to get them out to our customers. Anyway, we're just growing by leaps and bounds. And then Karen showed me a few things, like she, and maybe through some realtors and organizations in Portland, she was a great networker. She really, and the guy that wrote for the Oregon Journal, the wine writer, I forget his name, but she and him were really close, and Matt Kramer and Karen were really close. And she found out that these new properties were being developed in Portland. The US Bank Tower was one of the first. She got there before anybody else. And Karen, and she got in there, man, she dominated. I didn't have that kind of, I would just wonder at what she could do with these guys, because that was more her class of people too, these managers that were making lots of bucks in these places, and the Heathman Hotel, this sort of thing. And she got there, and I saw the interview by Tom Wolfe where he talks about Karen wrote the list. And that was amazing. And so we had that going for us, and then they got the divorce. And that was really sad. We were all just in shock. We were just all in shock, and it's like the company just stood still there for a while, kind of wondering what happened to Karen and this sort of thing. And bless her heart, I finally reached out to her, but not right away. I wish I had been more compassionate and understanding, but Howard was driving the... Anyway, finally got a hold of Karen, and she assured me that in the settlement there was nothing she would do to hurt in any way the company. She actually became the landlord for the warehouse. And but boy, she was sorely missed. And then I really had to go to work. I was a sales manager then, and I was kept busy. We probably had 22 salesmen, and by this time they were living in their markets. Another good choice. Why drive? Steve Carey and Mike and I, we drove to the markets, came back, filled the orders, drove back and delivered. As we grew, that was crazy. We had the guys call us in on the phone, call the orders in from Eugene. We had people living in Portland, people living in Bend, Mike Rockensay on the coast, Mark Sturgis, one of the best salesmen ever, living in Bandon. And he would go all the way to Brookings. And so we had these guys Dieter up in Hood River. We had all these guys calling in their orders, and then we had to deliver, so we got a fleet of trucks and drivers, and they took the wines off. But of course that's what you had to do. That's how you had to be efficient. But I had to keep control of all these guys, you know. And so it was a voicemail system on telephones and pagers, and long before, you know, cell phones. That came after all this. So there was the pagers, and there was the voicemails, and yeah, it was crazy. We had great staff, girls that took the orders over the phone. We had gals in the office typing orders. We were not computerized. That was a big problem, I think, that kind of led to Columbia's opportunity to buy Henny Hinsdale. Was we weren't computerized, so we didn't have a great idea of what we were doing. You know, because you couldn't amass data to see what was going on. In the beginning, I used to take the invoices and sit there with a typewriter. Here in this house once, Beth got so mad at me, she came in there at all these pink invoices, and she just, come on, we need work around here. We got a little farm here. We got pigs, we got cows, we got sheep, we got turkeys, we have ducks, we have rabbits. Not all at once, but over the years, that's what we did here. We did all these things. Well, that's still running. So on Saturdays, I'd go for my long run, and then on Sundays, I'd sit here and add up invoices. That was wrong. That was wrong. My wife reminded me quickly of that. So yeah, I missed the kids growing up a bit. I worked way too hard, but darn it, I loved it. I loved it, every bit of it. It was great. No regrets. I had that. The wine career was fantastic. Then again, Columbia bought us. All that was good. They left us alone. They kept Henny Hinsdale, the whole structure, all the people, for a couple of years. Then scale of efficiencies.
Economies of scale.
Economy of scale, yeah. They moved us around, the office staff, these gals that worked for us for years, and loyal. They started being laid off. Sad. That was sad. And there was a little pissing and moaning. I was not real happy. Gary Battles, who had Miletus, had put to watch over us, and he was the manager of Henny Hinsdale division of Columbia. I learned so much. Oh man, you talk about sales. He grew up to the Gallo program, so Gary was well indoctrinated in the selling. Showed me that, you know, you not only sales, but to manage suppliers too. It was give and take. We didn't, at Henny, it was mostly give. But Gary came in and demanded better, lower prices for the post-offs and this sort of thing, and trade-offs. And the suppliers already knew that, but we weren't really taking advantage of that back in the day. But I learned so much from Gary Battles. But eventually Columbia, they already had a warehouse in Eugene. They kept our Henny Hinsdale guys in Southern Oregon. I think there were about 4 of them then, maybe 5. They kept the guys and built a warehouse in Bend for our guys to have an office. So when they worked for Henny Hinsdale before Columbia, they just worked out of their house, and they met the delivery truck and took it from there. And then Columbia set a branch here in Salem, and that was my responsibility, Mid-Valley. But my gosh, it wasn't wine. Wine was kind of a smaller part of the whole program. There was beer. There was beer, and great imported beer, great Oregon microbrewers, Portland Brewing, Full Sail, Deschutes. Oh yeah, we had Deschutes. They had to buy another company to get Deschutes, Admiralty Beverage, but they got Deschutes. Those kegs are heavy. The taverns would run out of beer on Saturday night, Sunday or Friday night. I'd have to get in the car, throw a keg into the Columbia's Ford Taurus trunk, reef that keg out, put on a hand truck, go into this restaurant cooler, hook it up, hook the taps up, wire, nitrogen sometimes for Guinness, carbon dioxide. I didn't know anything about beer. I'm not a beer drinker, I'm a wino. Snapple. Oh my gosh, Snapple was huge. The other teas hadn't come out yet, and Snapple was huge, and they were heavy. Those things, 24 bottles in a case, and it was pallets of, these grocery stores took pallets of Snapple. I couldn't believe, pallets of Franzia box wines. This was all really new to me. This was a whole nother world. I had to go back and learn like crazy. I don't know that I ever learned it. I kind of wanted to sell wine, but that was beyond the question. It was managing guys, payroll, and dealing with our truckers and dealing with this and that. I still continue to call on Roths here locally. I had been the guy that called on Safeway and Fred Meyer for all those years. But here Roths became my thing. And we went up to Willamette Valley wineries, and I had wine tastings for all the Roths managers. And that was fun. But then you get back there, and then we took turns on a rotating weekend schedule. But every fourth week, it was my turn. I'm a manager. I'm not going to designate someone else. I'm going to do it. So every fourth week, I was just dreading. I wouldn't have to take a keg of wine down to Corvallis, or take another keg here or there and get it hooked up. Wife was not happy about that, but that was a bit. So I lasted there about 3 years as branch manager, and then retired. I said, okay. My wife had a great job. She wasn't nursing, but she had a family business, Burger King, and she was making more money than I was. So let's retire. I had maxed out my 401k. Okay, I had maxed out my 401k. It was the last year, but I had gotten there. And so and Henny Hinsdale had started at 401k. Columbia took it over, and we had the contributions and stuff like that. So we had enough, I thought, probably wrongly, to retire, and so I did. And that was in 1998. 1998, and then we were busy here with the farm and the trees, and I really kind of didn't get out of kind of lost track of what was going on with the wine industry. There were a couple hundred wineries when I retired, and next thing I knew there were like 700. Now there's probably more.
1,000.
1,000?
Over 1,000 now.
Yeah. And so it was hard for me to go to tasting rooms, because typically when we went there as salesmen or sales staff representing, they rolled out the red carpet. Everything was gratis, including meals and dinners, and again, what a life. These guys would just literally roll out the red carpet, open up the best of their stuff, Behringer would compare their private reserves with the first growth of, and I don't know how they did this, but their private reserves came out in blind tastings first or second. It was amazing. Hard to believe, but yeah, that was a great life. So for me to go into wineries and stand in line, you know, let's try the Chardonnay. And this, yeah, that didn't work so well. So I continued to buy wine wholesale. I had enough contacts so I could get my wine wholesale, and I kind of knew what I wanted, and we were happy with doing that. So now here I am.
So I'm curious about. You've obviously talked about kind of the first people. You talk about Erath and Lett and those guys. And tell me about kind of after the Burgundy Challenge, after late '80s into the '90s, as more wineries were coming in, more people were coming in. Who were the people that stood out to you? Who were the new winemakers or new businesses in Oregon that made an impression on you?
Bethel Heights. Bethel Heights, great family. Wonderful way they divided up responsibility. Really enjoyed their wines. Argyle, Argyle, getting a champagne into the works was great. Rollins Souls, of course, Domaine Drouhin, and I spent some time even in Howard and Karen's Mercedes with Robert, driving around in Eugene. I went down there for tastings, and he stayed with John Henney. He was a good friend of John Henney's, and Robert stayed with John and Ann Henney at their place, and then after the tasting in Eugene, they went on, and he made his connections with Dave Lett and Dave Adelsheim, and Karen was working at the time, and so, visiting that hole in the ground, how many, $6 million, I don't know what it was, but watching Domaine Drouhin grow, and then going there and with some other wine folks, other distributors from around the country, Drouhin distributors, and kind of helping them set a price on what they were going to go out for the first Oregon Pinot Noir. We had, that was all totally fascinating. We had Southern Oregon, Ashland Wine Cellars. He was a great guy down there, had big ideas, and for Christmas he sent an entire wheel of Rogue Blue cheese, 1 kilo, I guess, maybe it's 2 kilo, yeah. There was a lot of wine, a lot of great wines from Oregon. So many. I'm having a hard time remembering them all. Bill Fuller, Tualatin, went out there, took the sales staff out to his place. We made many trips to Dundee. But Argyle, watching that whole thing develop, that was huge. One guy I forgot to mention, Mike Rogers worked for us. I think he was like the 5th employee, restaurateur guy here in Salem, Night Deposit. And he later, after Steve left, he became our purchasing agent. But Mike Rogers then left to become the representative, the Northwest representative for Dreyfus Ashby, who controlled all of Drouhin, but also Bollinger Champagne, and that was a tie-in with Argyle. There was some tie-in they had with Bollinger, and so that whole project was really fascinating. Roland, was a great teacher of how to make champagne and tasting the various, the juice before it started to ferment and all. We had some great times, many visits up there. And of course, Druin. There was a lot. Veritas, he didn't last a long time. John Howison, I think was his name. He's a radiologist. He was a guy that read the X-ray or MRI and found my brain tumor. I had this crazy lopsided broken face as a result of a brain tumor back in '90. And Howard and Karen, I think it took me about 5 weeks to get back to work, get back on my feet. I got paid every day.
Wow.
Yeah, unbelievable. And Howard and Karen came to the hospital with Beth. This was in Providence Hospital there in Portland, and 7-hour operation. And poor Beth was just scared to death. I of course didn't know anything. I was out in La La Land, but it was pretty bad. They had 3 nerves were impacted by the tumor and its removal, non-cancerous. But yeah, I lost my balance, equilibrium, death. Eye hasn't blinked for whatever it's been, 40 some years. But Howard and Karen, how they treated me was just phenomenal. I mean, I didn't work for many people in my career, in my life, but they were the best. They were the best. So much so that I think 1 year later, I had a kind of a secretive meeting with Ed Miletus in Portland. He wanted to hire me, and I said, no way. Finally got me, but but he had to buy the whole company. but yeah, no, I was totally loyal to Howard and Karen, and really loved them. Yeah. Other wine, I'm kind of foggy on. We had some 30 wineries, I think, Oregon wineries before we left. But the ones that stand out are Bethel Heights, Druin, and Argyle.
So tell me about. Obviously, you had a large number of interactions with a lot of the early folks in the industry. You talked about Richard Sommer a little bit already. Tell me what stands out about the rest of them when you think of David Lett, when you think of Dick Erath. What are the memories that come to mind? Are there particular stories or particular traits about them that you remember?
Okay, one day at Erath's garage, picking up some Riesling, he noticed that when I started my truck up, there was a clanking noise. Dick got in there, popped the hood open, took out some tools, something like I don't know what it was. I don't know mechanics. I don't know that much. I could change the oil. I could change some spark plugs, but I didn't go much further than that. But Dick knew motors, and yeah, he made the clanking go away. I thought that was great. David Lett. Okay, I got a story. We were selling a fair amount of Irie products, Pinot Gris like crazy. Pinot Noir was slow. Other Pinot Noirs were outselling David's. His style was maybe a little lighter. It didn't show well in tasting. It showed well in Gomio and or Druin, but it didn't show particularly well in blind tasting with the Pinot Noirs that were much more forward and richer and darker. Styles have changed. Styles are all over the place with Pinot Noir and the clones and this sort of thing. So what we wanted to help David out was to take him to grocery stores, which he had forbidden. He said, no way, no how, or do I ever want to see any of my wines in a grocery store. He came to our meetings and he impressed that point to all the salesmen sternly. And we said, Karen and Howard and I got our heads together and said, that's wrong. That's really wrong. He needs some distribution. He needs to get out there a little bit more. And so they elected me because I had a philosophy major. David Lett had a philosophy major. I drove up there one day to try to convince him to go to more, more outlets in retail. He couldn't just survive in bottle shops because of his production. It was pretty big, and there was out of state sales, but we saw that we could do more if we could get him into some of the grocery stores. So we sat there at his desk in his little office there, and we had an interesting discussion, but I didn't win. I didn't win. I don't know how many glasses of Pinot we went through, but it was futile. But it was soon after I retired. Heck, I could see Irie wines in Costco. They're still there. But so fortunately, I don't know, if Jason, whoever convinced them. I don't know the timeline because I had retired and I wasn't really watching that. But yeah, David finally. Okay, so that's a story about David Lett.
What about Myron?
Myron was kind of, okay, here's one of the strangest things that ever happened to us. Oh, I forgot to talk about Nouveau. That was so much fun. That was a lot of fun. His idea, my big account, Jake's in Portland, Karen, publicity, although I don't know where all the credit comes from. My job was just to get the wine there, just get the Nouveau there, and let our accounts know that this was going on. It had TV coverage, newspaper coverage. It was a big thing. Later I learned from your interview with Myron, there was a cash flow thing. It was a cash flow thing. He could release wine in the fall instead of wait for the spring and get some smart. And of course, Gamay Noir, his case, and Nouveau, yeah, they went together. And the wine sure was hard to sell after October. It sat in the warehouse. You couldn't. That was one big problem. If you didn't sell all the Nouveau right away, whether it was de Boeuf from France, or I don't know that Drouin had a Nouveau. I don't think so. But we had some other French Nouveaux, and boy, you come into Christmas and you couldn't give those things away. You drank them at home. But Myron, we had him for dinner. He was kind of a friend, him and Vicky. He actually, for a barbecue, ordered one of our lambs. We were growing lambs. I slaughtered it, cut it up, took a half of it over to Myron, and he had a gathering and barbecued a lamb there at the winery where a bunch of, it wasn't just any Hinze, it was all kinds of people came in for a weekend afternoon. So I got to know him pretty good. He was maybe a little bit random, but good wines. And Pinot Blanc, that Pinot Gris. If I have a preference, and it's Pinot Blanc over Pinot Gris. And I think Myron was the Nouveau thing, and then his Pinot Blanc. I really got to enjoy that. later on, you know, for my own personal use. And yeah, and the eco thing, yeah. Yeah, Myron, again, yeah, well, anyway, Myron, you could get pretty wild and crazy, but he's, I kept running into him, of all the winemakers here and there, and like at the airports or just in one or two restaurants. The guy got around. Yeah, I got a lot of respect for Myron. He worked awfully hard. And he was one of the ones that came most often to our sales meeting to talk. And his wines were pretty easy to sell, too.
Last question for you. What are you proudest of, or what is your greatest accomplishment?
Wow. I think there came a time at Henny Hinsdale after the divorce that was pretty rough. And I think I took it, my responsibility. Howard was sometimes missing in action. You know, it was hard on him too, and all that, and I really took it on my shoulders to keep our staff together through voicemail, as far as my sales team. Mike Rogers had more to do with the in-house staff than I did, but I wanted, you know, the salesmen, they don't have Karen anymore, and it used to be, the sales meetings were the Dick and Karen Pony show, basically, and they were a little numb, and I kind of had, I think, what I was able to do then, keep them focused. I had kind of the same responsibility when Columbia merged into us to kind of give the new spiel and again keep some cohesiveness in our organization so that they felt a little more at home. Maybe I learned a lot of this from Karen, you know, taking care of your own. But maybe that, you know, maybe I'm pretty proud of doing that. Other than that, it's just the growth of our company. I think, you know, getting them to take on some Oregon wines and seeing how that all developed, and just, yeah.
All the questions that I have for you, anything I didn't ask that I should have, or anything we didn't cover that you wanted to cover today?
Oh, we covered way too much. Yeah, this.
Well, you had notes. I love when people have notes.
Yeah, but I didn't.
You didn't even use them.
I didn't use them. Well, I do the notes so I can.
Sure.
So it's a rehearsal.
Sure.
It's a rehearsal. So you know, I did that, and I revised it this morning before you came, and tried to condense it a little bit and made the print bigger. The big problem is I can't read it. I needed these, and I'm too vain. Even though I think my appearance probably approves with glasses. You know, you don't see the eye as much, but damn, I'm vain, just like
I get it.
Just like Bill Fuller, that a couple years he wore a toupee.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share your stories with us, share your beautiful house with us. Really appreciate that, and go ahead and let you off the hook.
Okay.
Thank you.